President Trump says a massive U.S. Armada is heading towards Iran. And he's right. I mean, we're putting enough firepower in the Middle East right now that if he says go in the coming days, we'll be able to carry out effective, maybe even decapitating strikes against the Iranian regime. Now, analyst Ian Ellis over on X says the U.S. military is rapidly expanding its footprint in the Middle East, moving additional fighter aircraft, ships, air defense, and support assets into the region. In terms of what we know so far, he says the Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group is in the Indian Ocean and will soon enter the U.S. Fifth Fleet Central Command area of responsibility with an estimated time of arrival between the 24th and the 27th of January, depending on their speed. We know that 3 F-15 Strike Eagle squadrons are now forward deployed in the Middle East capable of carrying out operations deep inside of Iranian territory. You know, we may not have said that a while ago, but after we saw the effectiveness and the degradation of Iranian air defense during the 12-day war, no doubt those F-15s, just like Israel used them, could be used to carry out strikes deep inside of Iran. On top of that, we've got 2 F-35 squadrons, an F-16 squadron, and an A-10 squadron. We've also seen increased KC-135, those are refuelers, and C-17, those are cargo planes. Flights of each of those in the region supporting the ongoing military buildup. And there are rumors, no confirmation quite yet, that Patriot and THAAD air defense systems are reportedly en route. So those, of course, would be used to further harden and defend American interests in the region against the possibility of an Iranian response. Or for what it's worth, Iran maybe lashes out ahead of time. They see a U.S. strike as imminent. They decide to try to get ahead of it and carry out strikes to prevent the U.S. from carrying out these attacks. It's a little less likely, but no doubt one of the considerations for air defense assets moving into the region. Now, in terms of the size of this buildup, it is less than what we saw during the 12-day war. So, that being in June of this past year, the war between Israel and Iran that eventually led to the U.S. strikes against the Iranian nuclear facility under Operation Midnight Hammer. Less of a buildup than during that time period, but much more than normal. No doubt this is enough to get the attention of the Iranian regime. And the big picture here is whether or not the United States is actually going to take action. As we've addressed in recent videos, the Iranian regime is arguably weaker now than they have been in their 47-year history. They're teetering on the edge. And we actually have an argument that I'll present here in a second. I don't necessarily agree with it, but an argument that the last chance the regime has for its survival is hoping the United States actually strikes. Again, I don't agree with that sentiment, but I think it's worth voicing just for a different point of view here. Now, in terms of the arguments that a strike is imminent, that we're on the verge of carrying these out inside of Iran, the data playing in that favor is that the carrier, as we can see, is clearly within a couple days of arriving in theater. We've seen a lot of U.S. and British aircraft tracked being moved into theater. There's definitely a military buildup. We've talked about it before. President Trump likes to take big military action outside of market hours. So, you know, we got a couple more hours till the markets close here on Friday. That opens up that window Friday afternoon through Sunday. And then there's a real argument that we needed to get resources into theater before taking action. Yes, we absolutely could have carried out some sort of strikes against the Iranian regime back the first time that President Trump laid out his red line. His red line being, and it's moved for what it's worth, but at one point it was any crackdown or any violence against the protesters will be met with a U.S. response. For what it's worth, when President Trump said that that line had already been crossed at that point, we did have enough assets in theater to be able to carry out some sort of strike on Iran, but it would have been relatively limited. So there is a viable argument here that if we really want to take the necessary actions that could lead to the toppling or the decapitation of the Iranian regime, we needed time to put those resources into place. Now there was an argument here, and I'm going to present a kind of both sides of the discussion. One arguing in favor of U.S. strikes, saying the time is now, and another saying don't do this. This is actually a trap from Iran. So the first argument in favor here published in the Hudson Institute by K. Kaspaglu, my apologies in the pronunciation there, talked about Trump's military action window. He says, quote, regime change in Iran is no longer a matter of if, but when and in what direction. Supreme Leader Ham is old, 86, and no cleric of comparable authority stands ready to succeed. If the Islamic Republic suppresses the uprising, the likely outcome is an IRGC-dominated military dictatorship. Iran, as it exists today, will either sail into a militarized state or be given a chance, however uncertain, that it may return to its people. No one pretends the choices ahead are easy or without risk. A campaign would carry the burden of deciding which path to follow. So his main point here is this regime change is happening whether you like it or not. There's no clear successor to Ham Min right now, so why not take our shot, right? There's going to be new leadership in place at some point, 86 years old. Is it going to be 1 year, 5 years? Certainly within 10 years, we would think, right? So why not go for it? And then try to put the power back in the hands of the Iranian people. He says any potential military intervention would rest on two core principles. Preserve serving state capacity to govern post-Islamic Republic Iran while systematically breaking the hold of the clerical establishment and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps IRGC. The indirect objective would be to eventually return the country to the Iranian people and give them a chance to bring the post-1979 order to close for good. Important details there in terms of just going after the ruling party, not going after the entire country, not going after the entire government necessarily, and making sure that the government can still function. That's one of the things that would prevent a country from falling into lawlessness. I mean, you can see how quickly and how easily that would happen if all government services just went out the window, and how quickly you could see the rise of warlords and factions and gangs and extremist groups trying to step in and take that power. So, make no mistake, we're kind of talking about U.S. military action as being, yes, push that button and go kill a bunch of the IRGC leaders. We have to be very, very careful in how we go about doing that. If we go about doing that, another key component here is not even going after the military. And I thought this was interesting. He says, quote, if President Trump opts for the military option, the air campaign should also transmit a clear political signal by prioritizing hardline IRGC targets while sparing the Artesh, the conventional forces, wherever possible. The concept of operation should be reinforced by rhetoric that pressures the regular military to honor its oath to protect the people. This logic draws a deliberate contrast between the guards which shield the clerical elite and the regime from society, and the arts men in uniform who could instead shield the people from their regime. It's a great point and kind of plays into what we'll talk about here in a bit about the possibility of defection. Something that is no doubt needed across the Islamic regime for the people on the streets to have any degree of success. This is, I think, a lot easier said than done, right? To clearly differentiate conventional forces versus IRGC, especially when you start talking about the possibility of Iran retaliating with their missile and drone forces. So, I would expect that in any campaign here, just like Israel carried out during the 12-day war, some of the strikes would be carried out on the ability for Iran to retaliate. So preemptively going after some of these launch facilities, and a lot of those are not necessarily manned by the IRGC, but by the regular soldiers, the arts. So I think while I agree with the sentiment, I think it's a good strategy, very, very challenging to pull off, and I have not seen at this point any significant information operation trying to penetrate into Iranian society. I have to assume that it's there. Like there's no way that between the United States and Israel over the course of the last 47 years, we haven't been waiting for this moment, and have something in the lockbox you can just crack open and say here's the go plan to actually get some information in and try to shape the narrative on the ground. But we've not seen that publicly, at least not at this point. Now, the argument for strikes not being in the best benefit of not just Iran, but the American people is that the regime right now is appearing to regain an element of control that it's possible that the window may have passed. I mean, there was a brutal, and we'll get into the numbers here in a minute, but brutal crackdown. We're talking numbers coming out today north of 20,000 people may have been killed. Every family member in Iran we're hearing knows somebody who has lost someone. Like that's insane, the volume of violence here. It's entirely possible that the regime has already done what is necessary to crack down on this protest. Of course, we got some news about a week ago that our regional allies actually served to talk President Trump out of striking from I think it was Turkey, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, even arguments that Israel at the time said, let's not do this. Now, my understanding the Israeli argument was focused on they needed a little bit more time to stand up their defense, whereas the argument from some of our other allies in the region were worried about the destabilization of the Middle East. The last one here that this next article is going to focus on is the idea that the Iranian people would rally around the flag if foreign intervention stepped in. Now, personally, I've spoken about this multiple times. I'm not going to pretend like I'm changing my tune all of a sudden. I don't agree with this take. I think we have evidence from the 12-day war that the people are not of that when this bombing starts happening and it's going against the elites, especially in this case where it's going against people that are actively shooting them in the streets. I think the evidence is to the contrary, and that the people will support that, and they've been asking for that. They're looking for room to take over. They're not going to all of a sudden flock to the people that were executing their family members 2 hours prior. It's my personal opinion. Now, Nazar Vaziri wrote a guest article in the New Institute pushing back on the idea of U.S. military intervention, suggesting that this is actually the last possible option, and it's kind of like a stretch, a hope, last-ditch effort by the Iranian regime. They say, quote, as its options for stability run out, the Iranian regime could be provoking the United States into military action in order to dissolve the current protest movement. Some may even regard those cheering on such an attack as unpatriotic. Thus, a strike on Iran would be tantamount to President Trump throwing a lifeline to the regime. She says, contrary to the opposition's claims, repressive forces have yet to respond with great brutality. As before. Now, this was published on January 13th. All right. So, yes, we certainly have the evidence at this point that these crackdowns have far exceeded anything in the past. I'm wondering about the genuineness of this argument, because even on January 13th, we had pretty clear evidence that there had been significant violent crackdowns. Remember that the most violent days during these protests appear to have been 89 January. So, there were indications by the 13th that these crackdowns had been significant. But they wrap up by saying any form of kinetic action against Iran will put an immediate end to any form of open dissent. Iranians are extremely nationalistic, and any form of foreign attack on their land is usually prescribed by most of them in the strongest terms. Again, I felt like it was important to present this. We are seeing this argument thrown out there. I disagree, and in speaking with a Jonathan Sayet from FDD a couple days ago, an Iranian himself. We'll link that interview in the description below. He took part in the 2009 protest, and he's an Iran analyst now with Foundation for Defense of Democracies, pushed back on this as well, saying, look, there is foreign intervention, like it or not. I mean, the Iranian regime is propped up by China, Russia, and others. And in fact, there's a lot of evidence right now that in order to crack down on these protests, the Iranian government has been reaching out to their allies across the region, Shiite militias in Iraq, maybe even some from Afghanistan, some from Syria. So, there is international intervention. It's already happening. The argument that this person here, Visor, is making that the U.S. involvement, I guess we probably swap Israel in for that as well, would be a bridge too far. Again, personally, I don't agree with that assessment. Now, a lot of this hinges around these red lines we've mentioned that President Trump has laid out. You know, don't do this or else. And then we have seen those red lines shift a little bit. But just last night, for instance, Iran's top prosecutor denied a claim by President Trump that his intervention halted the execution of 800 people detained in nationwide protests, saying, quote, this claim is completely false. No such number exists, nor has the judiciary made any such decision. That was one of the reasons. One of the rationale that President Trump gave for holding off strikes against the Iranian regime is he kept touting 800 people were about to be hung, and they told me that they were not going to do it from the Iranian government themselves right now, saying what is he even talking about? In fact, we got some news just yesterday. This was published by the U.S. State Department in Persian that Iran had executed one of their soldiers for refusing to open fire on civilians. They say, quote, according to reports, Javid Kales, a young Iranian soldier, has been sentenced to death for refusing to shoot at innocent protesters. His refusal was not only justified, but it was the only moral choice. The duty of soldiers is to protect the citizens of their country, and Java did exactly that. It is reprehensible and inhumane that the Islamic Republic punishes those who refuse to aim their weapons at the people in their own streets. People who are someone's mother, father, brother, or sister. No government should demand that its security forces commit violence against their own fellow citizens. Nor should it impose the harshest punishment on those who choose conscience over oppression. Jav stood by his conscience and fulfilled the true duty of a soldier. The Islamic Republic's response, like so many of its other actions, is a stain on its legitimacy. And in terms of what has been playing out on the ground, we have started to get a little more internet access in Iran. So more reports are coming out, more videos are coming out, more pictures are coming out. And it is incredibly graphic. Blood everywhere, bodies everywhere, the morgues overflowing. Shikiri wrote an article titled Iran's Weekend of Blood to put some of this in perspective and said in Rasht, a city of 750,000 people, the regime reportedly set fire to the bazaar or the market, forcing vendors and customers to leave. The guards were waiting at the exits and opened fire on civilians, killing hundreds of people in a few minutes. For context, they say over 20 years of the global war on terror, roughly 7,000 Americans were killed in action in Afghanistan and Iraq combined. Conservative estimates suggest that at least twice that number were killed in Iran, largely over a single weekend. Put differently, the Islamic Republic may have killed more of its own citizens in 4 nights than the United States lost troops in 2 decades of continuous war. They add that in the 5-digit estimates are even approximately correct. This would constitute one of the largest single episodes of government violence against civilians in the 21st century. Again, the more information that comes out of Iran adds more veracity to those claims. We've already had the Iranian government verify at first thousands of deaths, and earlier today the foreign minister said 3,000. That alone makes it the most violent crackdown in Iranian regime history. So again, more access means more evidence, means more confirmation from across the country, from doctors, from people who survived. Just had a note from a friend in Iran recently saying that people on his street, he looked out the window, and they were just shot dead. They weren't protesting. They weren't a part of a protest. They weren't carrying weapons. They didn't have signs. But security forces rolled down the street, saw them there, opened fire, killed them, and rolled away. So again, the regime is very, very, very fragile right now. And if the United States or our allies or any of the Iranian people's allies want to take action to try to facilitate the end of this murderous dictatorship, now is the time. Now, what to watch for here in the coming days, of course, is the continued U.S. military buildup in the region. We've talked before that President Trump likes to take action on military action when the markets are closed. So, we've got a couple hours until that window really opens up. Iranian defections. There's news that one out of their UN delegation may have defected. Outside of that, we're not hearing a lot. There's some rumors that it's happening on the streets and that some troops are choosing to not open fire. Again, we have the incredible story there of Javed Kales, assuming that information is accurate. At least one soldier standing up saying, "I'm not going to shoot my fellow citizens." There's going to be more of that's needed if the Iranian people stand a chance against the regime. Then, of course, last but not least here with sporadic internet access at times, we are getting more information, more evidence to show exactly what is playing out on the ground. But this is, I feel like I've said this more than once at this point. It's hard to see how long this will actually go on. It takes incredible bravery for the Iranian people to keep going out. And this is not something that we can reasonably address in a month and hope to help them in any way. That window might already be closed. And if it isn't already, it's closing pretty quick. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.